Thank you guys so much for coming out. I really do appreciate your time. And I hope that you walk away with some different perspectives than you had when you walked in. So, sitting in a meeting on Fort Campbell. No, it wasn't Fort Campbell, it was Fort Lewis, just outside the Tacoma, Washington area. And in the meeting was my new boss, a retired Army colonel, and a current Army colonel who was the commander of the 555 Engineer Brigade, Triple Nickel. The topic of the meeting was me. And what was being discussed, ironically with very little input from me, was how I was going to deliver mental skills training to a group of combat engineers at Fort Leonard Wood. And then link up with this unit at the National Training Center to provide refresher training, and then embed with that unit for a week and a half out in the Mojave Desert for their training. And then link up with this unit in Kuwait, ride with them in a convoy out to Iraq, again provide refresher training, and help them implement that training during the first month of their deployment. Now I say new boss because this meeting was happening in November, and I had just landed at Fort Lewis in October. And I'd only applied for the job a little less than a month before that. So 2 months prior to this meeting, I was living in Los Angeles, working as a stuntman, and all I knew about the Army, truly, was what I'd learned from reruns of MASH. But there I was, listening to these people talk about how I'm going to deliver mental skills training from the back of a Humvee, in a tent, at night, in a desert, with explosions, and honestly, I don't even remember the details of all of them, but what I do remember is this, and I remember it very vividly, and it's an experience that every single person in this room has had. I remember my chest tightening, and I remember my heart racing, and I remember my muscles tensing, my mind swirling with thoughts. How am I supposed to, what do they expect me to, how am I gonna, over and over, emotions building, so intense. Stress. That's what I was experiencing, was stress. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about it because it's a huge problem. It's ubiquitous. It's widespread. We all experience it. And it's a problem not just individually, but organizationally as well. Let me show you a few numbers around that after I turn on this thing here. There we go. So the cost of stress. This is a report from the American Psychological Association. 80% of workers report experiencing a decent amount or a lot of stress. And 9 out of 10 people go home feeling used up at the end of the day. That's a huge portion of the workforce. And that's a big deal because stress, again, individually leads to what is it called? What's it called? The system that keeps us healthy. Oh, help me out. Immune system, yes. The immune system gets compromised when we've experienced chronic stress. That's well documented. It's well known, right? The immune system's compromised. We get sick more easily. Cardiovascular disease risk goes through the roof. Also on an organizational level, productivity goes down. Job satisfaction goes down reliably. For those of you who are familiar with the statistics and correlations, that's unheard of in social science research. This is 0.61. Reliably, job satisfaction will go down. Absenteeism goes up, turnover goes up, and healthcare costs skyrocket. The problem is not even just with health, it's mental as well. Because when we're experiencing stress, we can't think straight. Our cognitive processing gets screwy, and decision-making gets compromised. Emotionally, we're very volatile. We tend to not be able to regulate our emotions very well at all. And then socially, we don't connect with people well. Communication is compromised because we're in our heads. We're in our heads. We're not connecting with other people. And all of this creates a huge cost for businesses. This is an estimate from the American Psychiatric Association. in their foundation. $300 billion. $300 billion a year getting lost because of the stuff we're talking about. When people are experiencing stress, they're not showing up at work. Or if they are showing up at work, they're not really present at work. They're not really there. They're not being able to focus on what they're doing. And turnover, you know, the cost of recruiting and hiring and training, and then all the institutional knowledge that gets lost when people go. There's a tremendous cost to stress. So it's worth talking about, and it's worth understanding better. And that's where we're going to go today. We're going to talk about stress. Because it's something that, again, it affects us on so many different levels, but it's something that I think is misunderstood. It's something that I think that we need to, in order to move forward with, we have to challenge the assumptions that we make about it. We have to think differently about stress. And we're going to do that today. We're going to start here. Stress is very real. It is palpable. It is visceral. It is undeniable. And it's an illusion. So how can that be? How can stress be real and an illusion? Well, let me show you this. Take a look at this first picture and just raise your hand if you see a rabbit. Raise your hand if you see a duck. Raise your hand if you can see both. This is an example of what philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein called aspect perception. And it's the idea that the same information, the same data coming in can be interpreted in multiple ways, multiple valid ways. So nothing's changing in this picture. But it's a rabbit if you look at it one way, and it's a duck if you look at it a different way. And what affects whether or not we see it one way or the other is a variety of things. For example, if I were to have grown up in Polynesia, where there are no rabbits, but there are a lot of birds who look like ducks, I'm going to see a duck real quick. And I may not see a rabbit at all because I haven't even developed the concept of rabbit in my mind. It's not even a thing that I know exists. Whereas if I'd grown up in the middle of Australia among the Aborigines, where there are no ducks, but there are plenty of things who look like rabbits, that I'd see a rabbit. But this is the type of illusion that stress is. Let's take a look at another one. This is called a Necker cube. When you look at that cube, if it were solid, what do you see? Would you see the top of the cube and the right of the cube? Or would you see the bottom of the cube and the left side of the cube? Raise your hand if it's the top and the right side of the cube. Raise your hand if it's the bottom and the left side of the cube. A couple people see that one. This one's harder for me. This one's harder for me. The duck and the rabbit, I can switch back and forth very easily. This one is harder. I tend to see the top and this right side very quickly, very easily, very naturally. And I can make myself shift my perspective in such a way as to see the bottom and the left, but it takes some work. And I don't know why that is, but that's just how it is. But the fact is, I can do it. Again, the picture's not changing. It is what it is. But I can completely change my perspective about how I experience that cube. Let's take a look at one more. You see an old woman or a young woman? Raise your hand. Old woman is the first one that you see. It just popped right out. Young woman. Raise your hand. Yeah. Raise your hand if you can't see both. Okay, because I'm going to draw it all out for you. But no, so there are, again, it's one piece of data. There it is, right there. It's not changing. Nothing's shifting. But our experience of that picture depends on our perspective. Meaning that if I were to just flash this real quick and you see, oh, there it is, that's what it is, it's an old lady. And you walk out the room and you were to say, hey, what'd you see in that room? Somebody asked you the question. You said, well, it was an old lady on the screen. Whereas somebody sitting next to you could walk out and say something completely, no, there was a young lady, and fights break out. Like it's something that is, it's an incredibly valuable thing to understand, that it's not just the data that determine our experiences. We put our own spin on it. We put our own spin on what we experience. That's how stress is an illusion. Stress is the same thing, because this is where we have to challenge the first assumption, and that is that there is such a thing as stressful situations, stressful environments, stressful jobs. Those aren't real. They are simply situations, environments, jobs. Whether we experience stress in those situations, environments, jobs, depends on us. It depends on how we're viewing that situation. It depends on which aspects of those environments, situations, and jobs are most salient to us and our interpretation and perception of them. That's what determines stress. That's how stress is an illusion. In the same way that the rabbit duck, the cube, the old lady, young lady, the situations just are. And it's the exact reason why you can walk into the same work environment as somebody else and you experience stress whereas they don't. It's not the situation, it's how we interpret it. So, is there a way to predict when we will experience stress and when we won't in these situations? So we know it's not the situation that's doing it. Well, what is doing it? What creates stress is belief. And it's belief about two things. One, and this comes from, by the way, if there are any theory geeks out there, this is the transactional model of stress by Lazarus and Folkman, who put this out in mid-'80s, I think. So the first thing, when we get into a situation, we encounter some circumstances, we do what's called a primary appraisal. And that is, we ask the question, is there a threat? Might I be harmed in some kind of way? Do I think something bad might happen to me? That's the primary appraisal. But I don't think that that accurately captures the situation and stress as well as it could, which is why I've added in the stakes are high. Because what really matters in this situation is that it's important to us. The situation is important for some reason. It doesn't necessarily have to be perceived as a threat, but the stakes are high. Stuff is at stake. We want this, we really don't want that. Or we really want that, and we don't want that. Whatever it is, the stakes, there's a big difference between success and failure. That is the case in these situations. So that's the primary appraisal. And if the answer to this question is yes, I do perceive a threat, where the stakes are high, then we move to what's called the secondary appraisal. And that is, do I have the resources necessary to handle this situation well? Do I have what I need in order to be successful under these circumstances? And if the answer to both of those is no, that's where stress comes from. The stakes are high and I don't feel like I can handle it. That's where it comes from. So it's not about whatever the eaches are in the situation, it's about how we perceive that situation. So for example, going back to my story at Fort Lewis, primary appraisal, were the stakes high? Yeah, in at least two different ways. In at least two different ways. One was physical, personal, in the sense that you're going to put me in a desert for a week and a half and put me in a war zone where people are shooting? That's what you're going to do? Okay. That's one. But the other was professional. I just started this job. If I screw it up, am I going to lose it? Am I going to lose my job if I don't do this right? The stakes were high. So the answer here, yes. Do I have the resources that I need? Secondary appraisal. Well, when we talk about resources, what I mean is physical resources, mental resources, emotional resources, social resources, financial resources, time. Time is a resource. There are many different resources that are out there. Do I have the resources that I can bring to bear to be successful in this situation? Well, personal, going back to those threats, I don't even like to camp. I don't even like to go on picnics. Like, I don't want to be outside. And so now I'm going to live in a desert for a week and a half. So I have not developed over the course of my lifetime the skills and resources that would allow me to be in that situation with no threat. And then professionally, I just started this job. I'd spent, at that point, I guess it was about 20 years, 15 years to 20 years as a stuntman. I had gone to school, I'd gone to graduate school, I'd learned the stuff, I'd coached gymnastics, I'd applied the mental skills training with the gymnasts, I'd done some workshops with some ice skating people, I'd done some conference presentations, but I was relatively inexperienced and I'd never worked with the military, knew nothing about the military, and how these skills might be applicable to them and how to communicate them in ways where they believed that they were applicable. So again, did I have the resources professionally? I didn't think so. I doubted that for sure. So that's where the stress came from. So that's what stress is. What we also need to start talking about, though, is what stress is not. Because other assumptions around stress, I think, are also problematic. So let's talk about some things that sometimes stress gets confused with or conflated with. One is arousal. And arousal is just simply how energized we are, how pumped up we are, how amped up we are. That's all that is. And that's not the same as stress. Now, they are related. They do go together. If I experience stress, I can reliably expect my arousal levels to go up. Why? Because when I'm experiencing stress, when the stakes are high, my sympathetic nervous system will activate, and predictable, normal, natural changes physiologically will occur. My heart rate will increase, my breathing will increase, I will start to sweat more, blood pressure will change, pupils will dilate. There are a lot of different things that will happen. But they're not the same, and they're not the same in this way. Outside my house, there's a road. And when it rains, the road gets wet. So if it's raining, I know I can look outside and I'll see a wet road. But if I wake up in the morning and I look out the window and I see a wet road, I can't assume that it rained. Neighbor could have been watering the yard, street cleaner could have come through, any number of things could have happened. I can't assume that it rained. Stress and arousal work the same way. If I feel stress, then I can predictably expect my arousal levels to go up. But just because my arousal levels are up does not mean that I'm stressed. And that's an important thing to remember. We're going to come back to that in just a little bit. But that's one of the ways that stress is conflated. People assume that if the heart rate is elevated and breathing's changed and muscle tension, all these sympathetic nervous system symptoms have come up, that they must be stressed. That is wrong. And that's an important thing to recognize. The next thing that stress isn't is excitement. So sometimes stress gets conflated with excitement, but it's something that I think is useful to explore because there is a lot of similarities. So when we go back to the transactional model, that threat and the resources question, if I ask the question, is there a threat, are the stakes high? And this is one of the reasons, let me just back up a second. One of the reasons why I personally have gone with the stakes are high rather than threat is because I have been a stuntman for 30 years, and I have worked with the military, and I have worked with police officers and fire people. And I understand that the reality of the situation sometimes is that you're going into a threat. There's no flipping it around in your head. There's no rainbow unicorn situation. Like it's a threatening situation. Something bad might happen. When you do this thing, you might get hurt or dead. And you have to acknowledge that. So by saying, well, just turn the threat into a challenge. Well, okay, but it's a threat. I might die. So let's just be real about it, right? And so that's why I don't like this, just the threat. I think it's okay. We can acknowledge the fact that it's a threat, and we can still be excited. I get excited every time I go to work. I just worked on a show. It actually just aired this past Tuesday. It was called The Cleaning Lady. And the job, I was up on this, it was a boat. It was on whatever they put boats on when they're not in the water. And I don't know, I'm not a boat guy either. But anyway, so I'm up on this boat, and I'm doing a fight with this guy, and he knocks me off, and I fall, and I bounce off this picnic table and hit the ground. And it was about 10 feet up, and there were no pads. It was just off the boat to the ground by a picnic table. And so obviously there was a threat, but I was excited about it. And the difference is this. I can ask the question, is there a threat? Are the stakes high? And answer, yeah. But if I answer that question about resources as, do I have the resources necessary to deal with this threat, to handle it, Well, now, if the answer is yes, that's when I can lean in. That's when I experience excitement. That's when this emotion takes over. So can I be excited in situations that are threatening? Absolutely I can, if I'm confident in my ability to deal with them, if I believe I have the resources. So excitement is not that different from stress. Sympathetic nervous system activation still goes up. You're going to experience the same physiological changes, but the perception in that moment is very different. It's an approach perception rather than an avoidance perception. So that's excitement. The third thing that I want to talk about, nervousness. This actually is stress. So nervousness and stress are the same. It's just that here the relationship is like this. Nervousness is to stress the way that oak is to tree. All oaks are trees, not all trees are oaks. All nervousness is stress, not all stress is nervousness. Nervousness tends to happen in specific performance situations, at specific moments in time. So I'm standing on a boat, I'm about to fall off and bounce off the thing. I was nervous. I experienced some nervousness in that situation. And I experienced excitement. It's interesting how they bounce back and forth. Why? Because my mind bounces back and forth. Sometimes I focus on those things that the resources and my ability to handle the situation. Other times my mind shifts to those things, the questions. Well, do I really? You're 50. Do you really want to be falling off? The questions come up. But the fact is this, is nervousness is still, is there a threat? Yeah, the stakes are high. Do I feel like I have the resources to deal with it? There's doubt. There's doubt. And nervousness exists on a continuum. We have a little bit of nervousness, there's some fear, there's some panic, depending on the extent to which we believe that our resources are capable and the extent to which those stakes are high. So that's nervousness. So they are the same, just they need to be conceptualized a little bit differently. But this is a big one. Pressure. Too often I hear people use stress and pressure in the same breath, like they're the same thing. And they are not the same thing. And there are important differences as to why. I have an entire program on pressure that I get into all of this, and so I'm not going to get into the eaches and the details now, but I will just hit some of the highlights. And the highlight is this. The main difference is that pressure is about the consequences. Pressure is when we focus on the consequences. It's when we focus on what comes after, I don't want to screw this up because. If I mess this up, then. Whatever follows the then, whatever follows the because, if our mind is on that, we experience pressure. And pressure is connected to have to. When we believe that we have to do something. And that's tied to motivation, which I have a whole nother program. It's called Drive X on motivation. So I'm not going to get into all that either, but the short answer on that one is when we feel like we have to, that's not the best source of motivation. We want to look for some other ones because that's where pressure lives, is have to. So when we feel like we have to and our attention is in the future, on those potential consequences, not in the moment, not in now, not on the task at hand, but on what might happen later, that's when we experience pressure. Whereas stress, like we've been talking about, is about the situation right now. Are the stakes high? Yes. Do I have the resources right now to deal with what's happening? Yes or no? We're going to answer that. The answer is no, I experience stress. Is there a connection between stress and pressure? Yeah, through the stakes. Through the stakes. That's where it is. Because the stakes need to be high for me to experience stress. And if I'm experiencing pressure, my focus is on those stakes, those outcomes. Here's another little kicker about pressure that a lot of people don't think about, is that they talk about pressure in terms of only negative things. If I fail, then. But it works the other way too. If I knock this out of the park, then. If I do this well, then. And if the answer to that then is my business is taking off, my life's going to change for the better. Everything is going to improve. I mean, and huge, again, big stakes. It doesn't have to be negative with pressure. It can also be positive. We can experience a lot of pressure there as well. So those are some ways that stress is different from some of these other things here. So that's what stress is and what stress isn't. And what I want to talk about now, because we've been talking about resources a lot, are 4 resources that I focus on in the work that I do. And they're called the FACTS because it's an acronym that matches the things, and I made it all work, and it's great. But I think that they are incredibly useful resources, and they are able to be developed intentionally, and benefit is seen when we do. And the first of these resources is focus, attention. And in my opinion, this is the most important. It's coming first because it's the first letter in FACTS, but it's the most important, and it's because our entire realities, our entire worlds, our entire lives, everything that we know is the result of our attention. No memory that we have, no experience that we have involves anything that didn't make it into our attention. Attention is everything. And it's interesting to talk about it because there are 3 different components to it. You know, we walk through the world and we just think that what we see and what we experience is just what it is, but it's not. We're human beings. Our hardware is built the way that it is. I don't want to say flawed, it just is what it is. For example, there are light waves and sound waves happening right here in this room, right now. They're too short or too long for us to perceive. Through no fault of our own, it's just we're human. We can't do it. Doesn't mean they're not there. Doesn't mean they're not real. They are. The reality of our universe is that they exist. We simply aren't capable of perceiving. So one thing about attention is there's stuff going on that we have no idea because we're just not built to perceive it. The next piece about attention that I think is important is, let's say that there is stuff out in the world that we are capable of perceiving, but we don't. Why is that? It's because we are constantly bombarded with stimuli. Right now, we are being bombarded with stimuli. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, all the things. And our brains are simply incapable of processing all of that information. So only a little bit makes it in. What makes it in? What our brains decide is the most important stuff. How does it decide what's the most important stuff? Some of it's wired into us, some of it's environmental through how we've lived our lives and what we've learned. But at the end of the day, it's the fact is that the brain will only allow in certain stimuli. And we're missing a lot of other stuff. For example, this is an easy one to just give an example of. Think about right now what the floor feels like under your feet, or what the back of the chair feels like against your back. You can easily tune into that. That is a stimulus that is there. It has been there since you sat down. But you weren't paying attention to it. It wasn't in your awareness because it wasn't important. It wasn't important until I made it important by bringing it up. So now it's in your awareness. So not only are we missing things sometimes simply because we're human and we aren't capable of perceiving it, but sometimes we're missing stuff that we could potentially perceive, but it's just not making the cut into our brains. It's not making its way into our system to process. And the last thing about attention that I think is really important to talk about is the fact that once it does make it into our brains, once we do have whatever the stuff is, it's made the cut, it's in our conscious awareness, which aspect of it are we going to prioritize? Which aspect of it are we going to focus on? What's the meaning that we are going to create from that? Because stuff's making it in. Is it important or not important? Are we going to fixate on it or are we not going to fixate on it? Are we going to hold our attention on it or are we going to let it go? That's up to us as well. So focus, attention, that is a resource that particularly with so many things pulling at our attention right now, is incredibly valuable if we can figure out how to harness it. If we understand it better and can figure out how to use it, we will benefit. So that's one of the resources that I talk about. And in terms of stress, again, when we think about, all right, are the stakes high and what are my resources that I have available? Well, just bottom line, if I have my focus and attentional resources available, I will probably be better off. But how might I use that attention to alleviate stress? Well, maybe I can turn my attention to some other resources that may be more valuable in that situation. Or deprioritize. If I'm looking over here, maybe I don't need to be looking over there. Maybe I need to look over here. So focus, attention, tremendously valuable resource. The next is arousal. And we talked about a little bit, arousal already. But arousal as a resource works like this. At any minute of any day, for any task, anything that you are doing, there's a right amount of pumped upness for that thing. For us to be at our best in any given moment, there's a right amount of arousal for that. And if our arousal levels are too low, physically we tend to feel slow and lethargic, and mentally, again, lethargic. We can't think as well. Emotionally, we tend to be irritated, frustrated, volatile emotions. But if our arousal level is too high, we got problems there too. Physically, we're agitated. Mentally, our minds are racing. We can't land on the thought, can't stick with the thought. Emotionally, feeling anxious. But if we're just right, if we're in that place where the arousal level is exactly where it needs to be in order for me to be at my best, physically I'm calm, mentally I'm focused, emotionally I'm where I need to be in order to execute. So it comes down to really three things. Number one is, in any given moment, where does your arousal level need to be for you? Because this is a personal thing. It's an individual thing. If you were to come up here and give a talk, there's a right arousal level for you to do that well. And it may be different from the person next to you and different from the person next to that. But there is a right one for you. So what is it for you? Number two is, where are you currently in relation to that right amount of energy activation? Are you too low? Are you too high? Or are you just right? And number three, how do you either keep yourself in the just right or get yourself to the just right? What are the strategies and tools you're going to use for that? So that's arousal. And when we can manage and regulate that and really use those arousal levels as red flags, as clues, as cues that we're not where we need to be, and we can shift that quickly, we're much better off in whatever environment we happen to find ourselves. The third is confidence. Oh, I wanted to tell you a story real quick about arousal. I forgot about that. Because this was working with the Army, and I thought it was just one of the best experiences that I had. It was early on in my career, which is why it's really stuck in my head. I was working with, I think they were artillery. It was an artillery unit who doesn't do room clearing normally, but back then, everybody was room clearing. Because the war in Iraq, everybody was in an urban environment, everybody was clearing buildings, it didn't matter what your job was. So here come these artillery people, and they're going to clear buildings. And it was called MOUT, Military Operations in Urban Terrain. There were 4 buildings. And I had done some training with this unit, and now I'm with them out in the field, and I'm kind of following around behind with the platoon leader as they're doing all their stuff. And they were amped up. They were hyped. They were ready. There was no lack of motivation, for sure. And they said go, and off they went. And they started to clear these buildings. And the energy level was already high, and it just did this. It just kept climbing throughout. They would clear one building, and there'd be more amped up and more amped up. But the problem with that is that they were missing everything. I mean, they were missing targets. They were missing intelligence. There was computers sitting around they were supposed to get and do things with. They were missing all of that. Communication was absurd at the beginning and non-existent toward the end. It was crazy. And even me, who was new and didn't really understand a whole lot about MOUT training at the time, knew it was crazy. And it ended, and at the end, there's what's called an observer controller who does the evaluations of the units. And the observer controller walked out, and he said a lot of stuff, but one of them was this. He said, you know what? You guys need to calm down, and you need to take a tactical pause before you go in the room. And I thought, yeah, you're right. That's 100% what they need to do. But what he didn't do was tell them how to calm down or what to do during the tactical pause that might be helpful. And so I talked to him, and I said, look, all right, you guys remember when we were talking about deliberate breathing, right? So we talked about deliberate breathing, we talked about cue words, we talked about performance routines. How might you use that stuff to make things better? And so we went back and forth, and what they came up with was they were going to stack on the door, and then they'd say, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Ready? Big breath in, breath out, go. And they'd clear the room, and they'd do priorities of work, and they'd restack. Slow, smooth, smooth is fast. Ready? Go. And that routine did a couple things. One, slow, smooth, smooth, and fast directed their attention to where it needed to be for them. It's not about powering through. It's not about going fast. It's not about rushing all over the place. Slow and smooth. Let's be deliberate. That breath allowed them to check in and then adjust their arousal level. On the breath in, where am I at? Am I too high? Am I too low? Breath out, I can regulate, I can manage, I can reset. Okay, go. And that's what they did. And they did it over and over. And the improvement was astounding. It was astounding. I mean, you would expect people to do things the second time and be better when they do it the second time, but these guys were way better. So much so that the OC pulled me off to the side after, like, what did you say? What did you do? I don't know where this improvement came from. I've never seen it. And so we had a good long conversation too, and that's a story for another day. But the point is that arousal level, it can impact performance in very meaningful ways without anybody even knowing. We don't even recognize it. But when we can just stop and tune in and adjust it as we go, we see huge benefit. All right, so the next resource is confidence. Confidence is essentially what that second appraisal is about, that secondary appraisal. Do I have the resources necessary to deal with this situation? I mean, confidence is just about to what extent do I believe I'm capable of being successful in this situation? And the way that I come at it is a couple different ways. One is with self-efficacy theory, again, for the theory geeks who might be out there. This is Albert Bandura's theory that's been around a long time. And what it says is there are 4 sources of confidence. One is personal experience. Only one of 4. And I say that because having worked with so many leaders, what I've heard when I have the conversation with them about how do you boost the confidence of your people? Well, I just put them in the situation and let them figure it out. I mean, they do it enough times, they get confident in it. Maybe, but there are a few things that have to happen in order for that to be the case. Because personal experience isn't just about let's do it until we experience success, because as soon as we experience success, then we'll be confident. It's not that. Because we can experience success and actually have our confidence either stay the same or drop. How in the world does that happen? And we can fail and have our confidence go up. How does that happen? So personal experience is more complicated than just let's have people succeed. For example, if I succeed and you ask me, hey Brian, what led to the success? And I say, well, it was A, B, C. Do you think you can do it again? Yeah, 100%. If I know what it is that led to the success, and I believe I can replicate it, now my confidence goes up. But if you ask me that question, what led to success, and I say, I have no idea. I'm just glad it's over. You know what I'm saying? My confidence is not going to be higher next time around. Or, even worse, if I said, do you know what led to your success? Yeah, and it's never happening again. That was luck. Well, now my confidence is going to drop. Failure is the same thing. So when I experience failure, if you ask me, why did you fail? And I'm able to say, because of this, this, and that, and you ask, can you change it? And I say, absolutely I can. Now my confidence is higher the second time. But if you ask me, why did you fail? And I say, I don't know why I failed. Or, I do know why I failed, and I don't think I can change it. Well, now confidence drops. So personal experience is a great predictor of and source of confidence, but it's not as cut and dry as just you need to succeed and you need to avoid failing. It's not that. It's what we attribute that success and failure to. The next source is vicarious experience, and it works about the same way. This is just watching other people. So if I watch you succeed, and I know why you succeeded, and I think I can replicate what you did, then my confidence goes up. If I see you succeed, and I don't think I can do what you did, my confidence goes down. I watch you fail, I know what you did, I can replicate, I can fix it, confidence goes up. If I watch you fail, I don't know, what you did, or I don't think I can replicate it, confidence goes down. Now, here's the one difference with vicarious experience, though, is that it tends to be a stronger source of confidence when we're looking at people or watching people who are similar to ourselves in whatever we're doing. Whatever the skill level is that we're watching, we need to be watching somebody that we can, we need to be able to say, well, if he can do it, I can do it. We need to be able to say that. Because if it's me, I don't know, let's say I want to learn how to throw a football better, and I'm comparing myself to, I don't know, pick your quarterback of your favorite team. That's not the right model for me. I don't need to be assessing my ability to throw a quarterback compared to this other person. Right? So the models matter. We need to choose our models that we're looking at carefully. The third source of confidence is persuasion, and this is also important in terms of who it comes from. So if we hear from somebody that we trust, who we respect, that, you know what, you can do it. I know you can do it. I've watched you do this other stuff. Maybe you haven't done this before, but I believe you can. That means something, and my confidence will go up. Now, if it's the random Yahoo at the grocery store telling me the same thing, hey, I just overheard that conversation, I think, you know what, I believe you can do it too. That's not going to mean as much. That's not going to mean as much. So again, who it's coming from matters. The source of the information matters. And the last source of confidence gets back to arousal, and that is how we interpret physiological changes that happen in our bodies. So again, when we're in situations, performance environments, whatever it is, that matter to us, we care, it's important, we can expect the sympathetic nervous system to activate. We can expect certain predictable physiological changes to occur. Now, when they do occur, if I'm tuning in and I feel my heart racing and I feel my breathing increasing in rate, and I say, whoa, I must be nervous, and I wouldn't, I mean, why is my body doing this? It wouldn't be doing this if I were ready, but I'm not ready, clearly, because I can feel all this stuff. It must be, we second guess ourselves. We interpret those physiological effects as nervousness versus excitement. And like we just talked about before, this has been the theme of the whole deal. It's not the circumstances, it's the meaning that we assign to those circumstances. This idea that goes back 2,000 years at least to Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher. It's not events that disturb us, it's our judgment about those events that disturb us. So how we interpret what's going on, either externally or internally, determines our experience. So if I'm experiencing these physiological changes and I label them nervous, well then I'm nervous. If I label them excited, then I'm excited. If I label them as my body, of course my body's doing this. This is what bodies do. They do this in order to prepare us for action, to allow us to be at our best. That's why this is happening, so of course it is. Glad it is. Now I may need to regulate it a little bit, might need to manage it a little bit, but thank goodness it is happening. Otherwise I'd be in a big mess. So those are the four sources of confidence: personal experience, vicarious experience, persuasion, and those interpretations of the physiological effects. And if we can leverage all four, then we can allow ourselves to go into situations confident in our ability to bring the best of who we are. And we are absolutely at our best when we believe that we can bring the best of who we are. But all of that assumes that we actually understand the circumstances that we're in well enough to know whether the stakes are high and which resources are going to be helpful. But what if we don't know that stuff? Some of the strongest, most intense stress that we experience comes when we don't know what's going on. We don't understand the situation. We have no idea how things are going to turn out. And this is where uncertainty comes in. And the reason that the stress is so intense in that situation is because uncertainty, when we're uncertain, uncertainty itself becomes the threat. And it's impossible to know what resources need to be brought to bear regardless of whether we have them. So both conditions for stress are met. There's a threat, uncertainty, and I have no idea if I have the right resources or not because I don't even know what game we're playing. So that's why we experience so much stress with uncertainty. But here's the real kick in the pants, is that uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. We like to think that we're in control. We like to act like we can predict everything and manage everything and fix everything. But the truth is that the world doesn't work like that. That's not how the universe operates. The universe is like this. The universe, I did everything on that one slide. The universe is VUCA. I don't know if any of you have come across that term before. I came across it when I was working with the Army. But the universe is volatile. It's uncertain. It's complex. It's ambiguous. That's just the nature of things. So although we like to imagine this sense of control, this uncertainty becomes very real. And the facts can help, but they aren't tools to create certainty. They're tools to help us navigate life better, to navigate life more skillfully, to put ourselves fully immersed into this moment and allow ourselves to be at our best and be confident and comfortable that that's enough. That's what those tools allow us to do.